There's no music if you have no body to play it with, so take care of your body first.
You getting into the gym and you lifting weights and working on muscles it's physical therapy for the benefit of your playing.
The truth is, nothing works like just taking care of the simple stuff. Diet, exercise, and sleep. Take care of that and you'll be fine.
Join us as two musicians and fitness coaches discuss strength, wellness, and fitness in relation to musicians, artists, and performance. Hi, and welcome to the Tuned and Strong podcast. I'm your host, Angela McCuiston of Music Strong. I'm going solo today. Jen's not feeling well, but she is Dr. Jen Cabas-May of Tuned and Tone Performance, and she sends her regards. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, newly doctorified.
Whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Newly doctored Katie Mess. Katie, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Yeah, I don't know how you say it. I received my doctorate. It's like,
yes. I
finished doctored.
Yes. Finished my DMA. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you and who you are, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I'm based in sunny and right now very sweaty Orlando, Florida. I'm a Florida native, although I have traveled around a little bit for school, but I just finished my doctoral of musical arts and flute performance from the University of Florida. We were actually the very first class of DMA in performance at UF. They have other doctoral programs, but didn't have a DMA. But so one thing that was really unique about this program, and I think this is going to become a trend with a lot of DMA programs across the country, is that they're requiring a cognate. It's not unusual necessarily to do a cognate, but the requirement and how substantial this was, and especially that they really sort of preferred that you do something outside of music, but that can be supplemental to, is kind of unique to this program. And honestly, I think it makes it really strong. And their whole goal was to graduate DMAs who would be more marketable in today's economy in the music industry, because again, I see all the reactions. I mean, it's so true, right? If you graduate, from a college program, no matter how good you are, if all you can do is play the flute, good luck, right?
What are you going to do with that?
Yeah. So having, multiple skills is, there's obviously a balance. Like, you don't want to be a jack of all trades, master of none, but like having several irons in the fire that you can do really well is certainly beneficial. So all that to say, what I did for my cognate is applied physiology and kinesiology. And the intention was to look into injury prevention for performing artists. And of course, musicians is, where my love lies, and the primary community I anticipate working with. But so a lot of people were very surprised that I was, a doctoral level music student and doing all these science classes. I would get the question a lot, like, do you have a science background? No, but now I do. So I learned a ton. And I mean, that program is very geared toward athletics. University of Florida Go Gators. Big, I know you're a fan.
I'm doing the CHOP, the Florida State CHOP.
Right. But, it's a big athletic school. So a lot of people in that program were interested in working with athletes in some capacity. But I met a lot of people who had kind of a surprising track through it, like I did. There was somebody who I think had an undergraduate in engineering and was interested in doing prosthetics for recovering athletes or wherever that would take her. So we had some interesting conversations, and I was like, hey, you should do some cool stuff with musicians for, accessible instruments and things like that, like the Drellinger head joints and the upright head joints. But anyway,
100%.
Yeah. So anyway, that's where I went. And so that program is not geared specifically toward musicians. And this is sort of going to be the theme of what I'm going to talk about a lot today is there's not enough of that. There's not enough of this sort of wellness and physical education for performing artists. And like I can see in the background there for you in your office, the percentage of musicians who will be injured is astoundingly high, considering how little we actually talk about it. So that's the gist of like what I learned through all of this is something I already had an inkling in, but we need to educate our musicians a lot better about how their body works and how they can prevent pain. But how I ended up getting to this point, what made me pursue this, was I was injured myself. I dealt with, at the time, when it first started, I didn't know what it was. It started, in undergraduate, which I think is a pretty common thing that, a lot of people might start feeling the first signs of any kind of injury or playing related pain in college, because that's when we start getting more serious as players and we start spending more time in the practice room, sometimes not understanding that, suddenly going from like an hour a day to 4 hours a day, might hurt your body. But I was having pain, like shooting pains kind of across my my palm, and sometimes some aching in my wrists, sort of around my thumb. And I didn't know what it was. And, my teachers would just sort of tell me to stretch and, oh, maybe you should go see a chiropractor. And it helped enough to kind of, just rest a little bit if it was kind of bothering me for that week, or to do a little bit of stretching. And I did go see the chiropractor a few times, and that did, help when they would adjust me a little bit if I had some tension in my spine and all that. But it was intermittent enough that it was kind of like, this is weird, but I don't know what's going on. So it was a long journey, and I had different teachers who would talk to me about adjusting, well, maybe change your wrist position a little bit, and all of those things help, but the damage, I think, was already done. So by the time it actually became apparent that something was really wrong, it's cumulative. And that's how a lot of these things work, right? Overuse injuries. It's not like a one-off thing, unless you happen to have, a massive bike accident like you did. But of course, those things can kind of work in tandem, because, if you've had some kind of trauma before, it can certainly, exacerbate any overuse problems. But for most of us musicians, it's a cumulative, long-term, years and years of repetitive damage that we don't even realize we're doing. And that's exactly what happened to me. So when I was in my first master's degree in Colorado, and I wasn't playing a lot because that degree was in music theory, so I wasn't studying flute. So when I was practicing, it was kind of sporadic and kind of intense bursts, and I wasn't conditioned to it. I was also working at a fabric store where I was cutting a lot of thick, heavy fabrics with the same hand and I was also a editorial assistant for an online theory journal. So I was on the computer, all week as well. So it was sort of the perfect storm that exacerbated all the stuff that had started from playing related issues. And then everything else just sort of became too much, pushed it over the edge. And I started having pain in my forearm, and we said, oh, I think I saw a rheumatologist at first, because my mom has rheumatoid arthritis, and I was around the age where they, so we were like, maybe that's what's going on, and let's just make sure that's not what's happening. He was pretty dismissive, said, I don't think that's what it is. Maybe it's tendonitis. So he sent me to PT. I'm honestly very glad he sent me to PT, because that was really helpful at the time, but I didn't get a lot of answers about what was actually happening. So he sent me first to an occupational therapist, and she was wonderful. But I learned at that point, I knew nothing. It was just like, it hurts here when I play. And so occupational therapy, now I understand that it is a lot more fine motor skills, and it's usually like elbow down related stuff. And so she worked with me for a little bit, and we definitely did determine that I had some strength deficit in, my right hand versus my left. And so it's just like, yeah, you've definitely got something going on here. And then one day I came in, I said, my backpack is hurting. Like when I put my backpack on the other day, and like, I get really kind of hurt in my shoulder. And so she had been doing some, ultrasound therapy around my elbow. And she said, well, this really isn't my area, but I can do a little bit on your shoulder and see if that helps. And so she did the ultrasound on my shoulder right about here. And I said, okay, this is really strange. This doesn't really hurt, but I feel like I should tell you that I am feeling that all the way into my pinky. And she said, okay, we need to stop, and I need to send you somebody, because if you shouldn't be feeling something down in your hand from your shoulder if that's not where the problem is, basically. And so I ended up getting transferred to a PT who was more specialized in the upper body. And we started working with my neck and getting my shoulder, and that PT threw around thoracic outlet syndrome, which of course at the time I had no clue what that meant. Now I do. And now I think that's probably what it was, and what I still deal with from time to time. But it was really quite a journey, because that was like, almost 10 years ago that happened, that I was with this PT. And that was very much focused on just like keeping the pain under control and not really fixing a whole lot at that point. And I think that was, I don't think that was anything against that particular therapist, but she definitely didn't know anything about musicians, but she was open to letting me bring my flute in, and we kind of looked at some of that. So I was appreciative of that, but, she did her best. And I was in, fairly acute pain at that point. So that pain management and just getting it to subside was sort of the goal. And of course I was a very broke graduate student, so I couldn't maintain PT for longer than a few months. But when I got a new instrument several years later, and it was heavier, it came back. And I knew a little better what was going on at that point. So I got into physical therapy again, and it's been interesting. I've been in physical therapy 3 times for the same sort of pain. Well, actually, the second time had to do with headaches, and I wasn't sure, I saw a neurologist initially for that, but determined it was probably tension headaches. And now I know that that's definitely what it was. And it's all related to what was going on with my neck and shoulder, the tension there. And so while I went to this PT initially because I was having headaches, we ended up treating for the pain that would happen along my arm as well, because again, it's all related.
It's all related.
And that was a little bit more of some stretching and strengthening involved. He would do some manipulation and a little bit of, massage and such. But I got to see him quite a bit for a lot longer than I did the initial round of physical therapy. And that was right before I was going into UF, and knowing that I needed to figure out a cognate, I got really interested in hearing about and learning about what was happening and how I was being treated, so that I could, number one, help myself and to keep that from happening and learn to manage it, but then also prevent my students and my coworkers from having to go through this, because I had some students at the time that, like, playing alto flute with a straight head, for example, started to really bother their wrists. I can't play an alto flute with a straight head. It has to be curved. And I've just learned that now, and I will not play a straight head alto anymore. So, I'm trying not to yammer on and on about this, but this has been the journey. It started because of my own experience with having to go through just the rounds and rounds of medical professionals and seeing different people and being referred to different people and trying to figure out what was going on. And so I was being with that PT for a while, got a little bit better, was okay enough to manage, and learned a lot from, how to manage it. So, it still flares up every now and then, because what I haven't said so far is I said thoracic outlet, but I've also had a lot of ulnar nerve pain. And so when I said that, like, I could feel it all the way down in my pinky, it's like I can feel, when it was really bad, it would throb all the way from, where the nerve emerges from the neck, through my collarbone, down the back of my arm, through my elbow, and into my pinky. And I was actually getting numbness and tingling in my pinky and the side of my ring finger, which is the ulnar nerve. And
I can relate.
Yes, I know you can. And it was really uncomfortable when it was at its worst. I tell people that it felt like I had hit my funny bone really hard all the time. Mm-hmm. And so learning to manage that, because the nerve will get irritated every now and then. I've learned that, like, because nerves are very slow to heal and to recover from things. So I have just learned to accept that, like, take it easy. And if it does decide to be a little angry, I need to do my, my management routine and everything like that. So I've learned, but it's also, it's been a process. It doesn't just poof, go away. But so I found that learning more about it has really helped me understand what's happening a lot better. And that's why I decided I really wanted to get into to learn more about this. And APK, Applied Physiology and Kinesiology, was the best program, most successful program for me to learn what I wanted to learn at UF, because unfortunately, a lot of schools don't have specific tracks, if they even have a class that has to do with the physical aspect of musicians' health and wellness. And so I did get a lot of, sport and exercise and athletics, related science stuff. But kind of where I would go with all this is that there is overlap. All that information is still applicable to performing artists. We may be using a different type of skill set and different, maybe more fine motor skills than gross motor skills. And we might be using different sets of muscles and things like that. But at the same time, we do it typically for much, much greater periods of our life than most professional athletes would. So approaching the way that we practice and teach and perform from a fitness perspective has really changed the way I look at so much of what I do and so much of the way that I teach and talk to other people, even, and not just related to music, like even in daily life, like how I carry myself and how I do housework. If I'm like bending over sweeping or something, I think about not, it's like my back starts to hurt. Well, I'm not bending from my hip. I'm bending from my spine, my lower back. And so no wonder. So yeah, I will take a breath there and let you interject or ask any clarifying questions, because I have chatted for a little bit there.
That's perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping for. I mean, lots of things that have come up with what you were talking about. You hit on some things that we have had several other guests say. Several. I mean, Kelly Wilson was on a little while ago, and she said the same thing that you did. And I mean, like, we've had several other guests who just talk about the importance of basically that musicians are athletes, and how you just said that there's so much crossover between what you learned basically in the sports world with anatomy and physiology and kinesiology and how
exercise physiology and yeah,
exactly. And so how much crossover there is. And like, we toss around this phrase, musicians are athletes, and we don't really believe it because we don't think we're not running, we're not throwing a ball, we're not jumping. But I mean, what is an athlete?
Yeah, exactly. And I think exactly what you're saying, that we have to redefine what we mean when we say athlete, or people and the like community as a whole has to sort of understand a slightly different definition of what an athlete is. It's not sports, because even within sports, because like we talked about just before we started this, that I'm about to take my exam for the certified strength and conditioning specialist to the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And, I was doing preparatory courses and seminars and things with them, and the variety of people who come and take that certification, the sport that they're interested in and working with, would surprise you. I mean, the class, one of the seminars that I took, there was a guy who was interested in working with rodeo athletes. And the person teaching the class was really excited about that, because she's like in horse show jumping and rodeo and stuff. So not what you would expect, but if you think about that, just think about bull riding, the core that you need for that. You know what I mean?
That has some strength.
Absolutely. So there's the idea of what an athlete is not, limited to like what mainstream media talks about as sport and athlete. Like, it's not just football players and basketball players and hockey players. It's them for sure, but it's so much more. So, I mean, this is just totally pulled it out of my head, but like, if I were to talk about like what an athlete means to me, especially when I talk about the most inclusive section, it's just somebody who has a physical skill and they perform it at like the elite level. And maybe professionally, if you want to throw that in there, but if they're looking to train to perform at their most optimal, and that is exactly what musicians and performing artists do. And like we just said, they do it for just as much. They practice just as much, if maybe not even more, than some more gross motor skill sports do, and often for much longer periods of their life, greater proportions of their life. And so while we may not be in as great a risk from our activity for macro trauma situations, we are certainly way, way more at risk for micro trauma or an overuse or repetitive use injury. And your statistic behind you says 90%. And some of the research that I've done for my dissertation, it depends on the study that you find, but the numbers that I found were anywhere from like 49 to 95%. Mm-hmm. And it depends on how they conducted the study and the population that they're looking at and everything. But even if you take the lowest number there, 50%, your chances of 1 in 2, like you're sitting in the orchestra, if it's not the person beside you, it might be you. Like, right? That's still astounding that we don't teach people how to take care of their body, or even just understand their body more. Like, the lack of understanding just of basic anatomy is really, really astounding, because through, when I start talking about this and when I start presenting on my research and things and having to do my defense, and I'm talking to, a room full of PhDs when I was making my defense, and I had to say, like, some of this stuff seems kind of obvious. And certainly to me, like, once I learned about it, it's like, that seems kind of obvious, now that you say it, but we don't say it. We don't talk about it. And so that's one thing I've learned is that the amount of information is never too small, basically, or never too basic, because there's always somebody who's going to benefit from it. And on one hand, that's exciting that there's plenty to be able to share with people and plenty to be able to help people. But on the other hand, that's also kind of depressing, because it's like, we really should know more than this. So we're athletes. I 100% believe that. Slightly different per picture of what an athlete is to most people, but I think by most definitions, we should be considered that.
Absolutely. It's kind of funny. Back when I was in college, I got my bachelor's from like 99 to 03, so forever ago. And I remember when I first got my course load, it said I had to take a science. And so I was like, well, what science do I want to take? And like, well, we signed you up for geometry or geology. I'm like, I could care less about rocks.
Yes.
What do rocks have to do with flute? Well, you have to have this No, you don't. That's why you went to high school. This is a big pet peeve of mine. No, you don't. Why are we taking all these things that you should have had in high school? Like, we had to pick a science. I'm like, well, it's not going to be rock study. No, thanks. Nothing wrong with geology, but it's like, there was no interest, and why bother? So, well, I guess it's either chemistry or biology. That's it. And so I asked the school, I'm like, can I take anatomy? That I'm really interested in that. And they said, no, that's for nurses only. I'm like, says who? I mean, why? And they just went,
for everybody.
Yeah, everybody should have some like basics. And of course, the year after I finally take a science class, I find out there is a acoustical physics of music class that was offered. It wasn't offered when I needed it. And I'm like, that would have been applicable.
That was my story exactly, because we had the same, of course, you had the same thing. You had to have a physical science class for a gen ed, and I had wanted to take physics of music, but it wasn't offered the semester that I had waited to take it, because I had always told. See, that's the other thing about science that is a little bit of a pet peeve to me with anything. Because like I said, I have a master's degree in music theory, and a lot of people will go like, "Oh my God, are you crazy?" Like, yeah, I like it. Sorry, like, it's not. But so much about music theory, like when I would tutor that, is saying, this is describing things that you observe. You do understand what we're talking about. You have seen what we're talking about. You have heard what we're talking about. So much of understanding it is understanding the terminology that we're using to talk about it. That's, I think, what intimidates a lot of people about it. I think it's the same thing with a lot of science classes. And so that really frustrates me, because the attitude that I hear from a lot of musicians when I start trying to talk to them about, what do you know about injury prevention? What would you like to know? What do you think we need more of? Is very much this idea of like, oh yeah, I'm all for that, but that's beyond me. That's out of my wheelhouse. And it's like, it's really not, though.
It's not.
If you have, the language can be a limiting factor, but if you have somebody who knows what they're doing and can talk to you like a person and not down to you, and can explain it in ways that is, how we would use it day to day. It's not something that is beyond most anybody. It's really stuff that you can wrap your head around. And, but that I bring that up because physics for me was something that I had heard so many people say like, oh, it's so hard, it's scary. And so I was like, oh, I don't want to take that. And so I waited till the last semester to take it. And so the only thing I could take was Intro to Lasers and Light. And honestly, it was a cool class. Like, honestly, it was a cool class, because we also talked about like the way your eye works, like the lens of the eye, because it was lasers has a lot to do with lenses. But I was so mad that I had waited, because I loved the class and I did fine in it. So I was like, I should have taken that physics of music class. So it's the same thing. And it was all about, but cool story. Now that I teach at Rollins, where I went to undergrad, I've made a little bit of a relationship with one of the physics professors, or actually he's like the main, like I think he's the chair of the department, was doing research on aerosols for COVID with wind and singers. And so he's the one who teaches that class because he has a particular interest in music. He's a musician himself. He's a trumpet player.
Perfect.
And so I got to participate in that study and talk to him a little bit about some of that stuff. So that was, things, what goes around comes around and all that good stuff. But anyway, yeah. So just kind of feeding off of, I'm glad you brought that up, that we brought this up, because that's a huge thing to me too, that I try to, and part of what my dissertation project was about was sort of saying, we need more education. It's not beyond people. It's not beyond music educators to know a little bit more about the physical aspect of what we teach. Because speaking of this attitude that like, we're not really athletes, I think a lot of that too comes from this idea that like athletes are super physical and we're artists. We're very, creative and cerebral, and that's not untrue, but there is at the core of what we do a very physical component. And so it doesn't make sense to me why we wouldn't be responsible for understanding what the physical ramifications are of what we do and what we teach to our students. Because the number of teachers that I have met who, like, I bring something up like that and they're like, I don't know, go see a doctor.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, which one?
Right. It's like, great, not bad advice. And it's nice. It's great that you acknowledge that you don't have the knowledge to help somebody. That's always great. But yeah, at the same time, not super helpful, because yes, there's that's another thing that I kind of shocked me a little bit about how little most people understand about the specifics of what different disciplines of medical provider do. And I learned a lot about this. There's a lot I didn't know. And I grew up like pseudo medical background with my family. My mom, neither one of my parents were physicians, but my mom was a lab tech and my dad works in nursing home care and was around a lot of doctors and things like that. So I felt like I grew up with like a kind of baseline of a lot of just sort of medical and about your body understanding that I'm finding as I get older, a lot of people don't have. And again, kind of unfortunate. Because it would save so many people so much just stress and pain. And, if you knew a little bit more about how to take care of yourself. So
absolutely. It's funny that you brought this up. Literally yesterday, I had somebody message me on Instagram and say, hey, I'm sending my student to talk to you because you do consults, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I can't help you, I want to send you to somebody who can,
right? Not
just say, well, I can't help you.
Right.
And she said, I just know enough to know that I don't know what to tell them, but I wish I did. I'm like,
yeah,
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And when you bring up that point of the terminology, I remember when I was studying for my my CPT, which I have
my big tests. They're big tests.
They are big tests, and mine is through the National Academy of Sports Medicine. And quite honestly, the CPT was hard. I talked to my brother the entire drive. I had to travel 2 hours from Panama City to Tallahassee to take the test. And it was at like an airfield. It was at a really weird location. Yeah, it was odd. And there was me and like 4 other people. I think it's like, it had to be a certain software or something. I don't know. This was back in like 2008, like forever ago when I first got started. And I talked to my brother the entire way. I'm like, bro, I don't think I'm going to make it. I can't. And then he didn't even ask me any questions. He literally sat on the phone with me for 2 hours and I just spewed knowledge at him. And I got to the end and went, I'm going to fail. He goes, you just
told me. Yeah.
100%. I went,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I still barely passed. Seriously. It was so hard. Right.
Yeah. It's so much science. It is a lot of
so much.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. No,
it's great. Yeah.
The dentist who graduates at the bottom of the class is still a dentist.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's just the knowledge at the very beginning that you had to learn to be able to go out in the world and know some of what you're doing instead of having no clue, right?
The way that the CSCS have talked about it too, they say a CSCS is an entry-level certification.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the thing that you earn after years and years of practice. It's the thing that you earn to get your experience in practice.
Yes.
And so just passing something like that isn't indicative of how good or not good of a practitioner you are, of a coach you are, but they very much try to make that clear that like so much of what we do is learned in the field, like, on the job. And I feel like that's true of so many professions too. Like we don't, just because you go to school doesn't mean you're going to graduate being like, all right, ready to do this thing. I mean, very rarely is that the case, but yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of information, but it also says something that there's so much information and it's as hard as it is. And so to pass it, period, even if it's not like flying colors, means you have a certain base of information that's formidable.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And right after I did that, and then I started getting my first clients, and I realized immediately how much I thought, you have that imposter syndrome.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
You and I have talked about that. I've texted you being like, I don't know, it's intimidating. You're like, you'll be fine.
Yes, you do. You're going to be fine. Because it just takes practice to kind of get in your groove and be like, oh, it's this. Oh, it's this. Oh, and then you start seeing patterns, these things. But going back to when I was first learning it, I absolutely love anatomy. I just think it's fascinating. And the kinesiology of how the body works together. And it just, these light bulbs just kept going off in my brain about, so this is how the shoulder's related to the neck, which is related to the serratus of the TVA and the psoas, you know. And I feel like musicians just love to throw around 3 terms: the psoas, the diaphragm, and the carpal tunnel. Which they say you have carpal tunnel, you have
tendonitis.
Tendonitis. Yeah, it's like the body parts.
Everything is tendonitis.
Everything is tendonitis.
Everything is tendonitis. Yeah. Even carpal tunnel is tendonitis. Like they don't really understand what that means, and that just goes through. So I definitely have spent a lot of time explaining that kind of thing to people too. I'm like, it could be any number of things. Like tendonitis is not the only overuse injury that you could have, and absolutely. But that just highlights how little we educate. And so, I don't know about you, but I mean, I feel like everybody I've mentioned this to agrees that like we should be teaching this stuff as soon as somebody picks up an instrument, like from
100%
young, because on one hand, this is what was tricky is because like for my degree and my project, the scope of these things can easily get out of hand. I mean, especially because this is still kind of an emerging specialty in within music and fitness and wellness and all this kind of stuff. There is research out there, but a lot of it, what I have found, is mostly saying this is a problem and not so much here's how we fix it. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And so there's so much research still to be done out there that a project like this can very easily become so huge in scope. And so, for the sake of graduating, you have to kind of, find a niche or find a, one area to focus in on to do. So I had to focus on collegiate players because that's the group that I'm interested in teaching and all this kind of stuff, even though I want to work with all levels of players from, the get-go to people who have been playing for decades professionally and are experiencing pain and have chronic pain and stuff like that. I had to focus in on one group. And to be fair, like I said earlier, I think collegiate musicians is where you tend to see the beginnings of things because that's when they start they start really amping up their playing and the intensity of their playing. And so that's where, but the problem is not just the intensity of it, but it's bad habits that were never corrected to that point that are now becoming cumulative and exacerbated because of the intensity of playing. It's not just that like suddenly I started playing more and I'm hurting. It's also that like you've been playing like this, with your wrist hyperextended, for 10 years, and now you're really straining it and now you're feeling it. And so in order to really truly prevent things, it needs to start a lot earlier. So one of the questions that I posed in my defense was like, can you imagine what it would look like if we had a battery of assessments, even just a couple of them, a really simple few, that we started as an intake screen for any new students to establish a baseline of like, if we know that this is what good flute, I'm speaking from flute players just because this is what my project was on and what I'm at, but good flute playing or good violin playing or good guitar playing, or good timpani playing or whatever, this is what this looks like. And this is what we need to be able to do physically to perform optimally. And then we are able to assess whether someone coming in as a baseline is or is not meeting that, that we can head off any potential problems. Not to say that we're going to 100% be successful in preventing anything, because stuff happens and, we're human, we're not perfect, but like, and things develop and things change, but like already that would be a start toward catching postural things that someone's doing or technique things that someone's doing that could cause them overuse or repetitive use injury in the future. If we can nip that in the bud, then the thing we have to deal with is, okay, how do you periodize your training or your practice as a musician so that you don't, overtrain basically and cause an overuse injury for that reason.
We just talked about this. If you guys have not listened to the episodes with Danielle Kuntz, who's the harp player, we just talked about this. Like, why don't musicians have structured deload weeks like you have in training? So when you say periodized progressive training, that means you are taking a certain set of exercises or a certain set of training, and you are gradually amping that up. And then you have, quote, a structured deload where you ramp it back. You do the opposite. And
rest. It's a rest period. Yeah.
And you cycle through that. Well, why don't we do that intentionally?
Yeah. And the other thing about that with periodization that I find really interesting, and it's something that I want to maybe write some more about or present some more about, maybe with you, is the idea too, not just that like we work in cycles like you would with a normal fitness, but that also, like, if you think about it from a sport performance perspective, like where this is, I think, where like we've talked a little bit in the past, like where the CPT from a CSCS is a little different,
right?
Is that like a CSCS, we also, I'm sure you do this with CPT, but I know CPT is more interested in personal fitness, like individualized. And when we're talking about like sports teams,
right,
they periodize to peak at the right place in the sports season.
In the season, right?
Exactly. And so if you apply that to musicians, I've had teachers talk about this, teachers that are really good teachers talk about this, like, you don't need to be playing this at 144 at the marked tempo a month before you're ready to perform, because you're going to plateau and you're going to burn out on that piece. So you don't want to be peaking on a piece of music too soon before the performance.
Yep.
So planning your practice, same concept would go for hurting yourself for physically. Like, you don't want to overtire any of these muscles or these joints that are involved in whatever instrument you're playing before you're ready to perform. And so thinking about planning your training, periodizing, periodic increasing in increments of your training, if we think about our practice sessions as training sessions, because that's essentially what they are.
They absolutely is exactly what they are.
If you think about it like that, then planning it such that you are ramping up your practice so that you're peaking in time for a performance, that would help prevent, these college student syndrome of like coming back from summer, where it's like, I've been doing nothing all summer and suddenly I'm practicing 3 hours a day and no wonder I'm hurting.
Or coming back from COVID doing nothing, and now you have to go on tour. What?
Exactly. All of that kind of thing. And not like cold turkey, suddenly ramping up your practice, that like, that you have this much time before you have this big performance or series of performances or whatever, and you have all this time or X amount of time beforehand to get in there. How do I ramp this up so that I am conditioned to do that comfortably? And, and all of this to me, because one of the questions that has come up a lot, all through my studies and through discussions with my project and stuff was like, okay, well, how do we, it's all good information, but how do we create buy-in? How do we get people to actually use this information and do it? And one of the things that I feel like it's kind of simple, but like injury prevention is performance enhancement. And so if you frame it also not just as like, well, it's something I have to do because I want to prevent, I don't want to get hurt, because a lot of people would have this attitude of like, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm not hurting now, so whatever I'm doing must be fine. It's like, it is until it isn't, right? So
everything works until it doesn't. And
right.
What do you do when it doesn't? And then are you just going to stop your career? I mean, too many do, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Exactly. So if you look at it instead as like, yes, I'm doing fine right now, but could I be doing better? And so, if you think of it more in terms of this is performance enhancement. So I'm looking at every aspect of the way that I'm playing and practicing, not just musically, like how do I sound, but like, how do I feel when I'm doing this? You are also enhancing your performance, or making, by delaying any kind of, unnecessary damage to your body. You are enhancing your ability to perform optimally for longer. So to me, that's a kind of a no-brainer that those things go hand in hand, that if you frame this kind of stuff as performance enhancement or performance improvement, it gives you an edge, as opposed to like, you're trying to, then it can become also something that becomes an expected part of your practice and training and instruction, as opposed to something else that we have to find time to do.
Part of it.
Yeah, it's just part of it. And again, going back to the education aspect of it, I think that attitude starts from the get-go, that if we start training our younger musicians, that way, that like this, learning to stretch, learning to think about the way that you carry yourself, learning to not just, learning to ramp up your practice gradually, as opposed to just, start only cram practice when you need it kind of thing. Because we all know that doesn't work, even though we're all guilty of doing it every now and then. But like,
yeah.
But
I think it also, there's also another aspect of that training the younger musicians. I think it starts with body awareness. If you're not sure of the terminology of all the anatomical parts of the body that you need to know, that's fine. Yeah. But you can start developing a really good body awareness in your younger students. I mean, my professor at Florida State would tell me all the time, do you feel your feet?
Right.
I mean, we think about it. We're in our headspace so much. We're thinking about our fingers and our embouchure and our emotions and blah, blah, blah. What about the space behind your elbow? What about the spot underneath your ear? Pick a weird spot. What about the inside of your right big toe? Do you feel any of that while you're playing? You should.
Yeah.
Because you're not just a head and fingers and an embouchure and guitar strings, whatever. You are an entire musician. You use your entire body to play that instrument. So as with younger kids, I think like even just starting them out with, hey, how does that feel when you play this? Wiggle your so-and-so, or, kids love to move.
Yes, absolutely. And I find that with like talking about posture too, something I've started trying to do with them more is, and one thing I noticed that can be a challenge with, and also why I will not start kids younger than like 9 on flute, because they just don't have the proprioceptive body awareness, their concept of their body in space, and also some kind of, and where I'm getting at is like they have very little notion a lot of times of how their body can work together and also separately. Because, for example, I tell them, they're like this, and I'm like, okay, we need to raise, your flute, you're tilting, you see how much look in the mirror, see how much you're tilting your neck. Okay. So I kind of will put my hand here on the bottom and I'll lift it up and they get this.
And they move their entire body to the side.
Entire body goes to the side, as opposed to just, so then I spend time with them, kind of like, okay, is it all right if I touch you? And can I give me the weight of your elbow? And can you see that like I'm moving this and the rest of you doesn't have to move, like this is a separate joint and everything. But yeah, absolutely. Like we don't have to talk about like specific terminology for sure. Like, cause that's another thing I definitely have heard people. It's like, oh, that's too much for kids. It's like, no, it's not. They can totally understand that. And I agree with the body awareness thing. And that's something that like body mapping, I thought was really awesome, the way that they talked about that, because like, they would say exactly that. They would ask you like, okay, just have an exercise here. Just sit with your eyes closed. Can you feel like, can you be conscious of the space that's right directly behind you, beneath you, above you, right in front of you? Can you feel how you occupy the space that you're in right now and how you exist within this? And it really, I'm sure it probably hits people a little differently, but like individually, but being challenged to sort of think about it that way is revolutionary. But I feel like it's the same kind of concept of when you start understanding that, like, one that always blew my mind, and I love to talk about because it blows a lot of people's minds, because this is another one of those examples of this is like kind of obvious when you think about it, but we don't think about it, is that muscles can only pull. They don't push. So when you think about how something works on a joint, right? Like if you're doing a bicep curl, when you release that weight, your bicep is not pushing it down, right? It's, or vice versa. Like, so this idea of like synergy with around a joint and how those things work, like that totally to me changes the way I think about how I move and how I use, even just posture. So that kind of stuff, just that body awareness for sure is huge. And since you brought it up with body mapping, well, I brought up body mapping, but you brought up the concept of it. I also think it's like it takes a tribe, right? It takes a village, that there's no one specific discipline or modality that's going to fix it all. And so I love to talk about this idea of continuum of care, and not of course, a fitness professional, a medical professional can all play a role in that, and certainly should. And everybody has their own scope of practice that they work within. But guess who should be included in that often is not? The applied instructors. Yeah. So the music teachers, the music educators, like, are part of that continuum of care. You are often like the first point of contact for anything that's happening. And so the more that you can know, even if it is to say something's going on with you, I don't have the knowledge to help you with it, but I do know this is not within my scope of practice to help you with, and you need to do something else because I don't want to get hurt. Even starting to say that kind of thing and developing a network of people or a continuum. I wish there were more of that. And I do see it happening a little bit. Because I'm a member of PAMA, Performing Arts Medicine Association, and everybody that's in there is interested in the same kinds of things. But Johns Hopkins Peabody has a clinic, University of Rochester Eastman has a clinic, North Texas has a degree in it now, has a PhD in performing arts medicine, which is awesome. Side note, any flutists that are in this area, David Brown from UNT is going to be coming to NFA, to the NFA convention. He's actually on one of the panel discussions for the Performance Health Committee. And if I haven't said it before, Katie is part of the Performance Health Committee for the NFA. And it's part of this series we're doing with, conversations with the committee. And one of the presentations that was that we submitted includes him and several other people that are also in the pedagogy committee. And it's called, I don't want to say all of it, but it's a very long title, but it's basically deconstructing the use of anatomical terms in teaching. So like, breathe from the belly and use the diaphragm.
Right.
I remember. Yeah.
Let's talk about what this really means. So he's actually going to be there. So if you're going to be in the Chicago area, come to the NFA convention and meet him.
That's awesome. Yes. That's exactly what we need, is more of this. Because like that, when I would talk to people who are somewhat more entrenched in sort of the, performance health kind of situation, what they would say is exactly what I'm saying. It's like, I do think we need more education. We need more resources that way somehow to get it across. Because like everybody agrees that we want this information, that this is good, that we should be able to have injury prevention, or not people who know what to do with that. But like, nobody can give you a good idea of like where to go get that information per se. And if they do, a lot of times, like, it's either go see a doctor, like we said before, just like blanket a doctor, or go see a body mapping expert or an Alexander technique or Feldenkrais or whatever. And I have worked with people, both body mapping and Alexander, and people who I haven't worked with a Feldenkrais specialist, but I know people who have, and they're wonderful. And a really good body mapping or AT teacher are like worth their weight in gold. They're fantastic. But for me personally, with the issues that I was having, I found that it was really good at pointing out where I was having problems, but it didn't really fix it. And so for me, the fitness side of it and the PT side of it, physical therapy side of it, was really the thing that pushed it over to the edge, where it was like, I actually feel like this is doing something for me and something that I can latch onto. And maybe that's not true for everybody. Maybe something for some people, like body mapping is going to give you a lot. But I believe for most people, it's a combination, like we said, continuum of care. It's not one specialist that you're going to be able to see, one teacher that you're going to be able to see that's going to fix it. And so we somehow need to be able to have, up and coming musicians have access to all of these modalities so that they can, absorb, the best of everything to help them. And even if it is just, if something happens to me, I know that that's what this person does. That's a start, So that's my biggest soapbox right now, is just like, this should be, just like we say music theory and music history should be a required part of music curriculum. So should anatomy for musicians. So should, injury prevention or basic wellness care, for
Absolutely.
Musicians be a required.
I really think like we've talked about this a little bit, like with college courses and things, structuring it more towards maybe taking out some of the stuff that might have been helpful at some point. But let's be honest, do you really need 8 semesters of theory in your undergrad? Can you get away with 4? Can you get stuff like that?
Yeah.
Where's the music business? Where's the health and wellness? Where's the entrepreneurial studies? Where's the, stuff that sets you up for reality? And just thinking about what you were saying, I've got so many thoughts there, but that's what you're saying about that continuum of care is, I've been saying it in different ways, same thing, but musicians wellness is a team approach. If you think about the sports athletes we were talking about, watch a soccer game.
Yeah.
Somebody goes down every single game. Somebody goes down,
and the athletic trainer's there.
Yeah, and they're all the athletic trainers there, and they cart them off the field, and they're seen by X, Y, and Z, and they got a whole continuum of care, right?
You have a whole entourage of medical professionals ready to take care of them, and
what do we have?
Why not us?
Yeah. There's absolutely no reason we can't have the same thing.
Yep.
And thinking about going back to the whole terminology thing, like when I was studying for my CPT, I felt so, especially the CES, my gosh, it was the hardest thing besides my master's comps that I had ever had to do. It was so intense.
Comps are no walk in the park. So
no, they're not. But I mean, it doesn't have to be that intense, right? I mean, there's certain parts of the anatomy that everybody can learn. You can learn what a deltoid is. Absolutely. You can learn what the pectoralis major minor is. You can learn the transverse abdominis. I mean, you don't have to get into every one of the finger flexum digitorum extensor. You don't have to get into every single one of those.
Even in my project, even in my paper, I would say like the palmar finger extensors, or I would not name them all individually because there's but absolutely. And I would say like, oh, like this muscle or this joint is like, this is like this here, the SC joint is like, is the only bony attachment of your arm upper extremity to your trunk. And, that's a really fun one to demonstrate with people. Like if you put your
fingers, I love that one.
Yeah. But like calling it the SC, or like then say like the sternocleidomastoid, like it's called this because, it connects the sternum, the clavicle and the mastoid process. And you don't need to remember that.
Just say SEM for short.
If SEM, but even that, you don't necessarily need to remember it. Just say that like this muscle is connected here and it does this to your neck. Even if you just remember what it does and where it is. Yeah. Because what I love to say to people too is like, you don't necessarily need to, I'm throwing a lot of terminology at you, not because I think it's important for you to remember it, but so that if you do find yourself in a situation where you could talk to somebody, at least you have heard it before and you kind of understand the context. So it's less about like remembering exactly what this is called and more about remembering that like this is involved with this. The exact name of it doesn't matter as much. But at the same time, like I love to demystify. One of my kinetic anatomy teacher was amazing. And the way she would structure her tests, I think is fantastic. And I wish more people would do this kind of approach to learning and assessment. She taught us, talked a lot about the way that the system of naming for a lot of parts of the body, and especially muscles. And she said, I don't want you to memorize the names of muscles. I don't want you to make flashcards. I don't want you to do that kind of stuff. What I want you to do is understand how to look at something where the insertion point is, where the origin point is. And if you look at a picture of a muscle, can you tell what it would do if it contracted? And if you can do that, you can probably give it a name. And it's so true that when you look at those things and you understand that. So again, demystifying, just like it just goes to show you that like the actual terminology, like what it's named, it doesn't really matter that much. And you'll find that it's often named for what it does. It's pretty literal. And so as long as you can understand and see what it does. And for me, learning anatomy, part of why I loved it so much was like, oh, I see that, like, it's something I can witness, I can observe, I can demonstrate, I can feel, it's not beyond me at all. And in fact, you find, you can really see that it is as pretty accessible because again, it's part of the observable part of your life. It's you use these muscles and these joints and these actions every day. So yeah, I'm all for that as well. So I'm excited about that NFA presentation because I think that that's really cool because I would love for more teachers to start talking, not be afraid to talk about this stuff in lessons because they're worried about getting terminology wrong.
Yes. And that's kind of why I wrote my book the way I did. Yeah. Because I was trying to make it more approachable and simplistic and not crazy terminology because let's be real, you're not going to remember it, And so I would say things like, what's funny is, like what you've said, people don't want to say the wrong thing, so they don't say anything at all. Well, that can be almost more hurtful than saying, call it by the wrong name, but say what it does, say how it works. Yeah. That's what's more important. Like I forgot that this is called a bicep, but I can tell you it curls my arm.
Right. This muscle here. This muscle here does this. And that's all you need.
Right. Because for this number to go down, we have to stop doing so much research that proves the musicians are injured. We know. What are we doing about it?
Yeah.
And I think this is what you're bringing up.
How do we fix it? Yeah, exactly.
Right. What you're bringing up is a really valid point. And we've had several people actually mention that as well. And I know you and I have talked about creating a course actually.
Yeah.
So
I think that would be so much fun. Honestly.
Yeah. So let's go ahead.
No, go ahead. All I was going to say is that, like, speaking of like accessible language and the way like your book is written versus, because I definitely I cited Angela's book in my dissertation.
That was a cool text I got from you. Like, wow.
Yeah. Because what my project is about is basically needs analysis. What I talked about is like, okay, what do we need to be able to do physically to do this particular activity optimally? Okay, and then now that we understand that, like what it goes into this activity, how do we assess if someone is up to par for it, if they are, ready to perform optimally? And if they're not, then you use those assessments to build a training program to improve those areas of deficit. And so that's essentially how my project is laid out. There's a needs assessment that just analyzes everything to do from bioenergetics to biomechanics and common injuries and things like that with the flute. Then it goes into a battery of assessments. And that was something that I hadn't seen in the research that I'd done, was assessments like that. There's, whether it's musicians focused or not, like there's plenty of information about like exercises and what they target and stuff. What yours book does that's really nice is it goes like, as a musician, here are some things that are really good for you. And that's really, I didn't find too many books that talked about exercises the way that yours did either. They would talk about you should exercise and you should stretch, but you break it down a little bit more specifically than that, which is really great. But what I had not seen so much is this: how do we tell what kinds of things where I need work? And so that's the sort of niche that I tried to fill with these assessments. But mine had to be kind of heady language just because this is an academic paper, but if I were to present this or publish this somewhere, I would definitely not dumb it down, but I would make the language a lot more accessible, because it gets intimidating. Even my flute teacher was like reading the bioenergetic section. She's like, I'm going to leave that to your APK committee person on that, because I'm just going to trust that if he says it's good, it's good. Because, I had to talk about the Krebs cycle and blah, 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 blah. And, and it's like, it doesn't seem like, and at the same time, I had to make it a case where it's like, it doesn't seem like that's relevant to musicians. And day to day, no, it's not. Like, we're not going to be talking about the way the body catalyzes energy and everything. But it was all to say, like, if you understand that different activities get energy from different systems or different processes in the body, that is why I'm choosing the exercises that I'm choosing, because it's the same concept of like, I'm not going to train a marathon runner like a power lifter. They need different, they need different types of training. And it's the same thing for a musician. So it's like, I'm not going to train you like a marathon runner or a baseball player or a power lifter. Like, I'm going to train you like a musician. And that is based on this understanding of the way that we, your body achieves this activity. So but anyway, she was like, that's over my head. But anyway, when I was doing this research, like, there are several really great resources out there. Like, there are some really great books talking about injury prevention, and like Janet Horvath has one,
Playing Less Hurt.
And there was, you said this too, and I'm totally blanking on it. Fit as a Fiddle or something like that.
I've got it right here. Fit as a Fiddle.
Yep. William Dawson. There was another one kind of like that. Yeah, there was another one that had some similar kind of title. They're really great resources. They have a lot of really good information, but again, they were sort of missing some of these key points for me of like, so for me, what I would love to see more of too is the kind of stuff that you're doing is like, this is like tangible, something that you can do that can help, and like how to figure out which aspect of this or what plan or would be best for you, but also not just saying, because for me, like, I'm the kind of person, and I think a lot of people really are deep down, that like, if you tell me do this, okay, great, but if I understand why I'm doing it, I'm much more likely to commit to it or do it more consistently and do it more correctly. And so for me, it's also about finding books that straddle, or finding resources or lecture series or presentations and stuff that straddle that line between giving you a good understanding, like, anatomy and a kind of science aspect without it feeling like it's over your head, so that you really understand, like, I'm not just telling you to do this, but I'm telling you to do this because this is how this works. And this is how this makes a difference, right? Yeah. So like another thing that I would love to, it was supposed to be in my project, but it just, again, scope, I had to cut it, was talking about like, and the CES, text and everything talks about the benefit of stretching, but also the biomechanics of it and the physiology of what's happening when you're stretching. And obviously you can very, very easily make that really, really intimidating sounding. But, understanding why certain types of stretching might be better in different, situations, or might serve somebody better for different activities, PNF versus dynamic stretching versus, that kind of thing. What the benefit of all of those things do, and what actually you are trying to achieve with that, and what, physiologically, neurologically happens is really interesting. And also to me changes the way I think about how I stretch, because a lot of people, like, I know you and I have had this conversation, I'm stretching my neck. It's like, well, how about, reach with your other hand? Do you feel that more, right? Or how about, okay, you're stretching one side of your neck. If you understand that there's different orientations, right? And that you that all of that, goes into place. So just one thing, one aspect of fitness and everything, stretching scientifically, why do we say you should do this in a way that you can understand? That's the kind of thing that I feel is lacking in the discussion in the current literature and resources of music wellness and injury prevention, so yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Like what that's another pet peeve I've got is that we mean well, but when something hurts, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to just stretch it. Stop telling people to just stretch. Stretch what? You don't know if it's tight or if it's weak or if it's tight and weak. Maybe it doesn't need to be stretched. What I find is most of the time that when somebody, tell me if you've seen this as well, but most of the time when somebody has something that hurts, and we're talking from a muscle imbalance, like an overuse type thing, not like an acute injury here. Yeah. But they've got something that hurts, like behind the shoulder blade, a lot of pain there. If you stretch it, it's not going to help. If you mash on it with a lacrosse ball, it's going to feel good, but it's not going to get any better. That's because it's weak. It's tight and stretched and weak. Now pull your shoulder blades together. Doesn't that feel good?
It stops hurting, right? Yeah.
It's not hurting. Guess what's the problem? The problem's on the opposite side. It's probably your chest or your SCM or whatever's not hurting that is causing it to be, that's tight. You need to stretch what doesn't hurt. But you can't say that all the time. It's kind of individualized, but
it is. But I do find that is definitely a trend and a misunderstanding. And that's sort of what I talk about with the idea of like muscles can only pull. Like it's such a seems like such an obvious or kind of foundational thing, but it's not. And it really makes a huge difference in the way that you think about it. And like, I will not name this person, but somebody that I teach with and play with in orchestras, nobody, but we have students that will sometimes play in the orchestra with us because the Bach Festival Orchestra is one of the innate orchestras that I play with is very, has a long association with Rollins. And so we play at the chapel there. And one of the great things about it is that we can have, it's kind of almost can be a training orchestra. Sometimes we have students who can fill in, especially strings. They can sit in some of the last stands and stuff and get to play some really great rep and have that experience. But the teacher was there and they were complaining. I think we were playing the creation, Haydn creation. And the students were saying how, like, I overheard them talking about how sore they were from having to sit for these very slow, and they're saying that like their back really hurt. And I came over and I said, oh, I can help with overhearing, but you need to, it says it's because you're being pulled forward. I was trying to explain this. The teacher came over and said, yeah, we don't need that stuff. We need to, we need to stretch. And she told me, use those stretches that we talked about in pedagogy class, like stretch this way. And I was like,
no, don't do. She did the one where you pull your arm, and for those who can't see, she pulled her arm in front of her face. Please stop doing that.
Yep. And I waited till she went, and I turned over them and I said, okay, here's the deal. And I told the students, and I feel like, sorry, I just bumped my camera. I told the students that, okay, look, you have to basically understand, to explain that concept of like, for every joint motion, you have like opposing muscles that will do, and they work in tandem to create the movement that you want. Like one will only move you in one direction. It can either pull or resist force, but they cannot push it. And so what's happening is you're spending time, all your time with your out in front of you. And so your chest is compressed and your back is stretched. And that's what's causing the problem. I said, so it might seem contradictory and your inclination is this hurts, so let me, but it's not going to do anything. It might feel good. Like you said, feel good for a second, but you notice that it doesn't go away. And they said, yeah. And I said, so try, I gave them like just some body weight tease kind of thing to do. And like some stretches with the doorway pec thing. And I was like, just real quick, just, just trust me, like, don't do what she just told you. You're not going to feel better. And they listened. And I was glad that they did but that's exactly the kind of thing. And it's unfortunate because I know that this teacher doesn't mean anything ill toward them by it. Like they have no ill intention, but like they've, been teaching for decades and teaching this and that's part of the issue.
Yeah, 100%. So, I think you're absolutely right that there's got to be some kind of, and not just one way. I mean, there's not one modality, there's not one method, there's not one course, one book, one thing that is going to solve this. I know the course that not to toot my own horn here, but the course that I created, the job security course, which I got to come up with a better name. It actually does all those things that you said. It provides the assessments, which I really want to look at your assessments too. Yeah, it provides the assessments. It talks about how the muscles work together. This is the anatomy you need to know. This is how you increase your body awareness. This is how you create your own program, and this is how you teach others. And this is how you assess others. And this is how you help others while still not having to have, you don't have to have any kind of specialized knowledge. We're just learning about the body.
Yeah,
and I really want to. Yeah, I want to turn that into either a certification, like get my own Buddhistic Strong certification, or tweak it to make it a college course, or just a teaching course, because I can't. It's the same thing you're saying. It's just the teachers are not equipped to deal with this, and there's no reason they can't be. It doesn't have to be so far over your head that you have to feel intimidated. I mean, the very first day I went to Barbara Conable's class, what every musician needs to know about the body. She came to Murfreesboro and did a 2-day workshop. And I remember leaving, there was a colleague went with me from tech, and we left that first day. Our eyes were like as big as our faces, like, oh my gosh. We were just so overwhelmed with the anatomy, and we had no idea how the body worked. It was just fascinating, awe-inspiring, and completely overwhelming at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that's kind of, it was approachable, but it was a little much at the same time. But it's like, you can still teach people that. That's
absolutely
valuable knowledge. And I was in college. I wasn't a quote professional yet. I wasn't teaching, a million kids. You can teach that to anybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really, it's been really eye-opening to me too. Like, as people knew that this is what I was studying, what I was researching and everything like that, that students it didn't matter. Like, I had students who were woodwind players, but also vocalists and stuff that would come to me in the hallway. They go, oh, can I ask you a question? I've been having this, and it's just people want this information. But don't know where to get it and don't know where to get it reliably. And oh my gosh, we need to talk for sure about assessments.
We do.
I most of mine come from like the CES method, and also oh my gosh, I'm blanking on it. The FMS and FCS, the functional movement screen and functional
that's brilliant stuff.
Yeah.
Gray Cook.
Yeah. Yep.
Brilliant stuff.
Yes. Yeah. And my professor is friends with them. So he, in our corrective exercise and our strength and conditioning classes, he taught about the FMS and FCS. And we actually did a lot of it. So that's part of why it made it into my dissertation, because it's good stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So that's where a lot of my, assessments come from. A lot of it is not, because again, is targeting the population that you're interested in working with, like musicians, and of course mine specifically focused on flutists. We don't need a lot of strength, You know, we don't, I mean, we do, but we don't need strength assessments. Like we don't need to be doing someone's 1RM, you know?
No.
And so a lot of the assessments focus more on quality of movement and range of motion and things like that. And there was absolutely some strength components in there, but it was more about like whole body synergistic strength, you know, like I did like a plank kind of thing in there, just to, you know, you can kind of watch how the kinetic chain works together kind of thing, and you see periods of weakness. But again, they're all were sort of meant to build upon each other, that like, you know, range of motion here, restriction here, you might be able to see when you do something like a plank or an overhead squat or whatever, and talking about, you know, the connection there. Because I worked with you a couple summers ago.
That's right.
And you did a movement assessment with me, and you had me do the overhead squat and everything. And then we learned about it in my classes. And I remember like the first time we learned it, because I had a whole class that was just assessment and exercise science.
Oh, fun.
And it was a lot of information I will never need, because it was like, we went into like cardio and all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah.
But it was also really fascinating. But I was very much like, why is this overhead squat, like, you know, such a thing? And now I'm like, oh yeah, you can see a lot.
You can see so much.
Yeah.
It's so, for anybody who doesn't know, it's really designed to put the body in an awkward position that really brings out your deficiencies and your weaknesses to the eye very quickly without having to fatigue you too much.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing to be able to see it. I know it's ridiculous. And then did you do the one leg squat too?
Yeah, we talked about, we had to talk about all that, the single leg and the, you know, hands on hips versus, you know, that kind of thing as well, all the variations of it and why you would use those. And I didn't put the single leg in my paper, because I don't, you know, what that would show wasn't necessarily relevant to flutists, we felt, but that interestingly that's really great that you put it that way too, because that's part of what was appealing to me about like the FMS, because that's exactly what those are designed to do as well. Put you in a somewhat extreme position that makes it impossible not to see compensations. And therefore, you know, tell if you have good quality of movement. And that's what I love about the corrective exercise stuff, because that's the next thing I'm going after is the CES. Because I had what I love about UF too is, and I guess they're one of the only schools that actually offer this right now, is they actually have a course in corrective exercise.
No way.
It's just a single class, and it's taught by my professor that I, you know, worked with me on my dissertation and stuff. But yeah, it's an actual, and you can do their online master's and master science in APK and take this class, and it is meant to prepare you to take the tests. Like it goes through the entire
the NASM CES.
Oh
man, that would have been really nice when I was studying for it. Jeez, it was hard.
and we use their textbook for it too. So I mean, it is directly from the NASM. But anyway, so though. It is so fascinating. But and to me, everything that I have learned, like it's one of the best applications of exercise science and fitness, you know, concepts for musicians. And it's like kind of like PT light. Like you get a lot of
it kind of is.
Yeah. Like you get a lot of the same kind of just like, you know, joint mechanics and you know, muscle balancing and things like that that you would be working with a PT for. Obviously we're not nearly as experienced maybe as a PT is, but you know, my sister just graduated with her DPT. And we were talking about a lot of the things that you know, we were learning and stuff, and she's like, you're learning the same stuff I am. Like maybe they spend more time with it or go into certain depth in different areas and have to know more things in certain areas, but like at the core, it's the same concepts. I say that like disclaimer, I am not a doctor, not that kind of doctor,
but it's good to know, right? Because people think, I mean, I've heard this a lot. Well, you just need to see a physical therapist. Physical therapists are amazing, but they're not always the answer, and they're not the end all be all. No. And I mean, if you got this whole subset of, like you said, it's kind of like PT light, you know, you get the strength coaches and the personal trainers and the athletic trainers and all these people who deal with strength on a more macro level than a PT who does with micro. But CES kind of does that. It bridges that gap is what I tell people. It's a lot of crossover. I mean, I get a lot of clients who come in and go, oh, I did that in PT. I'm like, yeah, let's progress it.
Right. Well, harder, and right? Exactly what you just said, the progression part of it is, again, going back to the continuum of care idea is where the scope of practice is, like where a PT ends is they're usually dealing with rehab, right? And getting you to a point where you are ready to go back, return to play. And of course, that's a term usually meaning return to play in sports, but we can also use the exact same term to mean the exact same thing, return to play your instrument or singing, whatever you're doing. And it is exactly that, but like, that's sort of where a PT's typical scope of practice ends, like where their treatment ends is when you're ready for return to play. And so that's where a good coach, fitness, strength coach, fitness trainer comes into play, is like, all right, let's continue this. Absolutely. And get you back to where you were when you're injured. Right. Yeah. Because when that's another misconception I find about PT is, PT is fantastic and a great PT is worth their weight in gold. Absolutely. But again, as long as they kind of know what they're doing, and like I was sort of started to say, was like, I would have been into 3 rounds of PT for the same thing. And every approach was a little different. Like the first one was very much pain management. The next time we started doing a little bit more of sort of the targeted strengthening. The third time was like basically going to a workout session. Like it was just all about, I had, they told me it was scapular dyskinesis. And so they were working on just getting those muscles to fire better and, in coordination and stuff like that. And it really made a difference, but it was amazing that trajectory to get to that point. And then now, like, if I stop doing what they had me do, like, we're right back where we were, right? Because it's a strengthening situation. And so that's where, like, a fitness coach would come in. That's their scope of practice, is to get you back to optimal. Because, thinking that PT, you're going to go through PT and, like, you get hurt and then you're going to, by the end of PT, be right back where you were. It doesn't work that way. They're getting you to manage the pain and to be able to function again. They're not necessarily guaranteeing that you're going to be in the same shape,
they could be getting you back to where you were without the pain, but you still have a level of dysfunction that you had before.
Exactly. Right. That it doesn't mean that just because you're pain free doesn't mean you fixed the thing that was causing pain.
Bingo. So this whole subset of strength trainers, please don't overlook them, because so many times you can, I feel like I preach this constantly, but you can only stretch what's tight for so long. And if you don't if you don't strengthen what's weak, that cycle of dysfunction will just continue and continue.
It hasn't actually balanced itself out.
It hasn't balanced it. Right. And so PT and strength training, they overlap a lot, but they work well, like you said, as a continuum. Yeah. And I love that you're talking about all of that. Yeah. They also work really well synergistically, like at the same time.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And what I love to also say and point out about this, because I've, like, again, a huge point about my project was to sort of look at music practice and music pedagogy, and specifically applied music instruction, like a fitness coach would. And so a applied teacher, if you think about it, a one-on-one, a private teacher, really functions a lot like a strength coach or a trainer does. You are working one-on-one with somebody to build a plan for training, to get this person to be performing optimally. It just happens to be in music, right? As opposed to, but it's the same kind of idea. We're building a curriculum, building a training or practice program, a regimen, a planning repertoire, which is the same kind of, you can liken that to planning the type of exercises that you're going to be doing and program and prescribing for somebody. It's the same kind of concept. And so if you have an applied teacher who has a little bit more understanding of the physical aspect of it, and you can, again, build that in, it's not in addition to, it is part of, music practice and pedagogy. It works the same way. Then in an applied instructor, that scope of practice is the same thing. They work with you up until injury, and then it's out of their scope of practice to if it's an injury that requires medical attention, obviously they're not qualified to treat you for that. And so you work with an expert on that field. And when they have deemed you ready to return to play, guess who gets them back? It's the applied instructor. So it's their job to take that person from recovery to back to optimal, and to do it safely without re-injury, ideally. That's ideal world, of course, because things don't always work that way. But the point is at least trying to prevent re-injury, because I mean, like I said before, like I know how to manage mine, but it does keep coming back. Like I've accepted it's not just like, boom, it's going to be better. Like it's a journey. And so I'm just, some of it is just managing expectation as well. Like great understanding that like, it doesn't just get better overnight. But anyway, the point being that like having a good teacher who sort of understands that process and where you are and that what their role is and how to periodize or plan your practice such that you are ramping up again to where you want to be musically without hurting yourself would be revolutionary to so many people. Sometimes when I think about like what that means and like what that would look like, it's not that complicated or crazy.
It's really not.
But it's amazing how many people go like, yeah, like, and like, that's mind blowing. And it's like, it shouldn't be, but yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you agree with me. So take it and run with it, if only it were that simple, but.
What is, as we wrap up here, what's on deck for you next? Where are you headed now that you've got your DMA?
Well, I'm kind of looking for full-time because at the moment I'm still adjunct in the area. I do a lot of playing and freelancing here, and I play with several orchestras and stuff. So I keep myself busy. Play with Disney too. Yay. Work with the mouse. I play for the holidays, so I'm not there all the time. But like during, we play the Epcot Candlelight Processional, and everybody got COVID this year, so that was fun. But so I'm still playing and teaching in the area until I find something more full time. It's just unfortunate that where I am, smaller schools, I know you can identify with this as well. They don't really have full time capacity for me right now. So I'm eventually looking to get a full time teaching position somewhere. But in the meantime, continuing to just enjoy my private students here. I have a decent private studio and playing and teaching. But I'm also sort of ramping up my presenting on this topic. So you and I will be at NFA talking about this kind of stuff. It sounds like in December, I'm going to be back at UF talking to some of their students about, I've been invited to come and talk, there's a 1-day symposium that they're going to do. And they've invited some of their graduates to come and talk about things. And because I have a rather unique perspective, considering the majority of students in that program, they said, you should come back and talk. And I'll probably, this isn't going to be till January of next year, but I will be probably submitting proposals to present at the Florida Flute Association. And, I definitely I need a little bit of a break. The dissertation was a lot, but eventually want to keep expanding that and maybe publish pieces of it or some of those things that had to get cut. I want to be working on some articles and presentations to talk about some of those things. So only a few things like definite on the calendar right now, but a lot in the works.
Yeah, I would love for you to write an article for my blog if that interests you. So we can talk more about that later. But do you have anything on the books about wanting to pursue anything with the physical aspect of this, or like how do you want to incorporate that going on? Yeah.
So interestingly, actually, because of this, the cognate as well. So the Master Science program in APK they have at UF is a 30 credit program, like most master's degrees. I did 22 credits in APK during my doctorate. So they were like, you should just finish the Master Science. So I'm looking into that to have that on my background. But in terms of like what I want to do with this and why I'm pursuing the CSCS and stuff is I don't necessarily envision myself really primarily or taking clients as a coach per se and doing it as a trainer, but it's definitely always sort of meant to supplement my music teaching. So becoming, an applied teacher that really talks a lot about the physical aspect of incorporates it in there. And of course, if there's somebody that needs it, having those certifications means that I can work with them that way. And I do have the credential to prescribe them some of those exercises and things and help them that way. But like, I know that you do, you have your own business with Music Strong and you do a lot of training, personal training and stuff like that. That's not the area that I expect to go. So it's more coordinating with people like you to help, again, build that network, to continue to educate more on the academic side of things and be a point of contact for people who need that care and being able to connect them with others who do that in a more hands-on way all the time.
Very awesome. Very awesome. Yeah. Well, where can people find you if they have questions or they want to reach out? If you're
I'm on Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Facebook. I can also give you my email, and you can either, I don't know, post somewhere or whatever, and any of that's always fine. I teach at Rollins College, so you can also find my information if you search the faculty at Rollins College. And yeah, that's I'm those are the main ways. I have a website as well, and there's a contact form there that you can. So it's katiemessflute.com. There's nothing about my fitness side of things on there right now, but it is a way you can contact me.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for being on our podcast today. We really enjoyed, I say we, but I know if Jen was here, she would really enjoy this conversation.
Sure. It's my pleasure. It's always a great time to talk about this stuff. I tend to talk people's ear off if I get started. So it's nice to have people who understand and be able to really, really get into it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for listening. And please don't forget to like, share, and please subscribe. And if you liked this episode, leave us a review. It will help us get in front of more musicians. So until next time, bye-bye. Hey musicians, did you know that up to 90% of musicians will experience playing-related pain or injury over the course of their career? How many hushed conversations have you heard about a lingering, quote, shoulder pain, or a weird tingling in your fingers? Or maybe low back pain, or a crampy weakness, or maybe you or your colleague just says, I just have to get through the gig. And you watch them pop Advil like candy, maybe flush it down with whiskey. How many times have we seen something like this? So many, right? Well, it's time we start talking about our struggles, our pain, our frustrations in a private space where we don't just complain and mobilize and blindly stretch, but we learn how to strengthen our muscles, our career successes, and build each other up. I've got a brand new program that combines all of these things, and I want you to be a part of it. It's a community, not a workout. It's a community with group coaching and great content that in 12 weeks will have you understanding more about your body, what you need, and how you work so you can avoid that career-threatening injury. The 3 things that musicians don't want. We don't want to be injured. We don't want to have a lack of stamina. And we don't want to be clueless, AKA when you hurt, who do you go see? Just a quote doctor? Well, this program addresses all of those things. You're going to walk away with an immense knowledge of who to see. You're going to be empowered because you're going to know what to do should you ever get injured, or should you have a colleague that gets injured. You will be able to actually offer appropriate advice. You're also going to learn about the body and the anatomy as it relates to playing your instrument, and your own anatomy. And then you're going to learn how to build not just your strength and endurance, but you're going to learn how to design your own corrective exercise program. So I hope you will join me in this new program. It's called the Music Strong Pilot Program, Job Security for Musicians.